Today's talk is about testing aesthetics, and one of Pivotal Labs' own, our very own, our only designer, Mariesa, is going to give the talk. So this will be really exciting for us. As Pivotal, we are a very test-driven culture from an engineering standpoint. So to bring some perspective around testing with regards to aesthetics is something that I think would be beneficial for us all to listen to. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Mariesa.
Hello, my name is Mariesa Dale, and I'm a product designer with Pivotal, like Andrew said. I've been with Pivotal for about the last 2 months or so, and previous to that I was with a startup in DC that was working on an encrypted messenger that's pretty similar to Slack. And then before that, I was independent, and I worked for various companies and organizations, big and small, World Bank, Hilton, little mom and pop shops like Each Peach Market and Food Juicery. And through working with these various companies and organizations, it happened more than I would probably like to admit, that you would submit a design to them, and in an effort to want to be helpful or to contribute, they would come back with feedback similar to, like, I don't like the button, I don't like it in green, I would prefer it in blue instead. And what's been so interesting to me through working with all these organizations and these companies is that the perceived usability is so unfailingly tied to the aesthetic of the thing. There's been several studies done now at this point that show the correlation between how somebody will relate to and perceive the usability to be within a snap judgment of how the design is. So there's a direct correlation between if they perceive the design to be good, they will also think of the usability, and they will recall the usability as better than it actually was. And that's been a very interesting experience. A visual design that is targeted effectively to an appropriate audience will be able to hook and keep the user exploring longer, helping them to engage with and learn the usability. Without proper framing of the problem and the objective, the focus on a particular type of user or persona, it's very easy to fall into this trap. From my experience, it's just as important to get the aesthetics of the thing right as it is the usability. And also the brand value, right? An app can deliver a decent user experience, but yet be totally forgettable, which can have major business implications for our clients. So how do we know that we've hit the mark? Most of us have generally heard about usability testing, but we rarely discuss how aesthetic plays into this, and how it plays into the feelings of usability. What is usability? We could go ahead and define that. Usability is typically known as the ease of use of a product. It's all about the core inherent value and how quickly someone can understand and use a man-made piece of software or a website. In that way, you can't really separate the usability from the visual design. So what is aesthetic? Aesthetic is actually an underlying set of principles that can guide a particular creative product or channel. Aesthetic appeals to all the senses. It's not just psychological, but it's also physiological. And there'll be a response to sensory stimulus. There are several studies done at this point that direct a correlation between perceived attractiveness and perceived usability for a range of products. Similarly, in usability testing, users' attitude toward a product is formed very rapidly in about 50 milliseconds and during that product interaction. Thus, the aesthetic of the product has become a signal of legitimacy to the user, and the lack thereof can be directly impact the visitors and prospective customers of the perceptions of the quality of the business, of the customer service. So, it's my approach that design is not nearly as subjective as we think it is. Design is actually a system. I personally view design more like a language. There is some flexibility in how you approach it, but there are methods that help you communicate effectively or not. You can use pizza as an example. I know you guys are eating very healthy food today, but I have pizza slides, so we're going to roll with that. In terms of design correlating with a language, if you wanted, there's several different ways that you could ask for pizza, for example, or you could go about designing something. You could say, like, I would really like to have pizza for lunch. Pizza sounds good to me. Can we buy a pizza? But you would never say something like, I like sandwiches. Can we do something else? It's not going to communicate effectively to your audience. So there are a few certain rules and guidelines that can be followed in order to ensure the best design. I'm going to go through a few of the universal design principles, and I'm going to pick on Pivotal and give them as an example about 3 different testing methods that you can use in-house and apply whatever role you may have in your company to what you're working on. So the first principle is unity and variety. The way that we tie things together and the way that we can draw correlation between them. Hierarchy. We can control where our users' eyes will fall, where they will go next, and what they will see. Proportion. The scale of things. Rhythm and repetition. This can lead a user into understanding what's to come next if you have consistent rhythm and repetition throughout your design and you've created that language, that visual language for yourself. Scale. How large things are and how small they are compared to others. Proximity. The way that they communicate with each other based on how close or how far apart they are from one another. And balance. All about equilibrium, creating equal sides. So there's 3 different ways that we can go, simple ways that we can go about testing aesthetic, just by yourself, pretty easily. And I'm going to pick on Pivotal Labs' website. This is their website as an example of how it is right now, so you can get a sense of what it looks like before I mess with it. So the first test is actually a desaturation test. What we've done is we've created a completely monochromatic view of it. We've taken out all the color, and what we're looking for is not only the contrast, but value. Our eyes actually pick up value much more intuitively and intensely than they would color. So when we remove the color, we can actually see the levels of contrast and where they recede, where they are not being as effective as they necessarily could be, especially in terms of engaging elements, buttons or links, etc. You can see in this particular example, I'll go back to the original, there's a contact button up in the top right-hand corner. When you implement the desaturation test, that button pretty much just fades away, which would most likely result in low or poor engagement. Secondly, with this too, millions of people have some sort of color blindness or visual impairment, and naturally, if you can do this test and you adjust it for contrast, it's very possible that just naturally you'll also make your site or your app more accessible to people with vision impairment. The next test is the blur test. There's a few different ways that you can go about doing this. You can actually do this in Photoshop, like I did, or there's actually Chrome plugins. There's a couple different Chrome plugins that you can do. So if it's a web-based thing that you're building, you can just click the button and you'll see different levels of blur. Or the low-key way is just to stand back from the screen a little bit and squint your eyes. And what we're looking for here is consistency in saturation values. So we can see the button very clearly down at the bottom that's engaging people. We can see in the top left, this would probably get a lot of attention from users. They understand who it is, which site that they're actually navigating through. But again, in the top right, we almost lose complete visibility of that contact button. The backwards test. You can also flip your design both horizontally and vertically. I've done it horizontally, obviously, in this case. This helps us to understand balance. If a design is too heavy on one side versus the other, You can get even more intense with this if you draw a straight line down the middle of the thing and see, not that it has to be symmetrical, but obviously that was the intent for the lower part of the screen here, and the execution was quite well done. But again, up in the top left now, since we flipped it horizontally, it is looking a little bit, with the weight of the pivotal logo on the right-hand side, it's looking a little bit off balance. Again, this contact button, pretty ineffective, picking on pivotal, but sorry guys, you might want to change that up a little bit. Seems to be the really consistent low engagement point for this. I'm guessing that you would probably lose clients and have lower engagement with that contact button because of this. So testing aesthetic in all is sort of like pizza. I love that dog. So there's 3 different parts to this. The first part is testing it yourself using the tools that I just showed. It's very easy to take this in-house. If you're a developer, you can apply these things as you're coding and just keep them in the back of your mind as you're building to make a better product. The second part would be to test it with your target demographic. Sit down with your user, sit with them face to face, understand how they're thinking about whatever it is that you're presenting to them. A lot of times there's several different methods of testing aesthetic with users. One of them would be, for example, heat maps. Even without talking or explaining, you can see where their eyes linger, where they don't even go at all, and correlating that to what's engagement points or what things that you want them to be understanding and knowing if that's actually being effective or not. Secondly, and probably more easily, one of the things that I try to do when I'm doing usability testing is open the test with framing a question that's more geared toward aesthetic. So you hand them the product, and their initial first glance, you're asking them to describe the landscape of the thing. And this is good because it helps kick the whole test off. It helps them to start thinking out loud and getting them to relate to you what they're seeing, what they're skipping. A lot of times it opens the door just very naturally to them telling you things about the UI that you wouldn't necessarily be able to or want to ask about directly, like font size or colors, things like that, that are not being as effective as you thought they might be. And then the third piece of the pie here is understanding the balancing the product's brand value. One of the most important things to establish about a design is whether or not it's a good reflection of the company and the product that it represents. To do this, you need a strong idea of what the characteristics of the brand are. Instead of asking the user which design they prefer of another, show them instead a list of brand words. Maybe just a list of adjectives and have your brand voice words sprinkled in there. And then have them pull out whichever adjectives that they feel are most distinguishable in relation to the design that you're showing them. This is great because it actually shifts the conversation to likes and dislikes. What I like may be very different from what you like. You may actually hate what I like. But that's, as much as possible, we want to get out of that mental model and try to have the conversation around, is it being effective to the brand and the product that we're building? So in conclusion, this is not attractive things work better. It's balance. It's an interplay, and I believe that it can be both. If you look after the usability, if you look after the design, the vast majority of the usability will actually look after itself. And I think a strong visual design is not based on personal style, but based on personal design principles. And if it's targeted effectively at the appropriate audience, you'll be able to hook and keep the user exploring longer, helping them to engage with and learn the usability.
Where can I go to find some of these tools that you showed us?
They're like the Chrome plugin. I can send like a link to WeWork and have them spread it out. It's pretty easy. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I have it. Photoshop is a great tool to be able to do the blur test.
How does, you're like right behind me.
I know.
Yeah, sorry.
I think the idea is really to keep it as low key as possible, to be able to use the tools that you already have to be able to apply these methodologies, right? To not have to like go after too many outside tools in order to be able to implement this.
So you talked about this as like, this design as a language, and I'm wondering, in your experience, do you find that like the dialect is different, or the language itself is different when you move from like web to mobile, or mobile to virtual reality, or like, you know, that type of thing? Like, is it the same set of principles, or are there changes?
Yeah, I think there's definitely changes, right? Like each one is its own special little snowflake, as my friend Laurel likes to say. But yeah, fundamentally, I mean, that's why these principles are universal, right? Is because even across different products, not even you know, anything that's code-based, even just like an industrial design or whatever, these are things that just as human beings, the way that our eyes work, the fact that we go immediately, like our eyes will always go to the greatest source of contrast. You know, things when we were down in the savannah and, you know, very basic part of humanity, we are always looking for anomalies out in the savannah and keeping ourselves safe, right? It's some of those like fundamental core things about just who we are as humans can always apply.
How do you apply this to thinking about doing redesigns? Like when the client looks at what they have and they decide they want a different look, how do you keep focus on maybe even making drastic changes yet maintaining the high level of interaction or hitting the goals that they want to hit?
Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult to get a client to. I was talking about this with another pivotal designer the other day. That a lot of times, at least with younger designers, it comes in. A lot of the personal bias comes in quite a bit. We want to add our personal style to things, and I think that with every client, there's always going to be sort of an educational component. We want to approach them with, no, this is traditionally like how you would approach a design is you want to, like, we want to make sure that our buttons are like this, and we really like this element from this site, and we want to pull this in. It's really more about like helping them understand their brand and their target audience, and seeing which elements are going to be most effective with that, and which voice is going to get through. Does that answer the question?
So Pivotal is an agile software company, right? And I've always been interested from a designer's perspective, how does the concept of agile change or help or make your job worse? Like as a designer, if you're working with clients, is it more comfortable to like, I did my thing, here's your thing, or like how does the agile process play into that?
That's a good question. We've had that come up a little bit in the project that I'm working on now. And I think that, you know, you just keep reiterating. It's like even with the usability tests, we have these small spikes, right? We're going back, we're looking at we're testing, we're framing the problem again, and then we're coming back down and creating a solution for it. Aesthetic is, I think, in the same way. You need to constantly be revisiting, in like a very agile approach, the decisions that you've made, and like continue to validate those all the way through. Like the project that we're on now, I created a certain button system and layout 2 months ago, and we are still getting feedback about UI elements. And there are things that people even now are picking up on, users are picking up on, that are helping me rethink and reframe this, and like wondering, you know, constantly questioning myself, is this being effective? So. Laurel.
What advice would you give to young designers to help them keep themselves like as unbiased as possible?
Keep your personal style out of it. It's so hard to do, because a lot of times as creative, we get into this in the first place because we like to be You know, we want to add our personal style to things, and we have a certain vision about the way the things we want to look. But I think, especially in software development, you have to. The more effective products are going to have the least amount of personal style included in them, right? It's more about like the contrast. If the button's being effective, the placement of that button, and not adding all the fancy bells and whistles that a lot of junior designers want to add in. Cool. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed your lunch.